The officer filmed the grandmother for likes. He didn't know she was the mother of an FBI agent. A week later, they came for him. Subscribe and write in the comments. Which city are you watching from? The sun was barely cresting the tops of the trees when Viola Jennings stepped out of the rented sedan. Her weight balanced carefully on her good hip, her hand wrapped tightly around the handle of her canvas bag. The street was quiet, lined with low brick homes and porches softened by time and dust. The kind of place where people swept their steps every Saturday and left their shoes at the door. Harmontown, Mississippi, population just under 9,000, depending on which cousin had gone off to college that year. On paper, it was unremarkable. A few churches, a tired grocery store, 2 diners, and a police department with a pristine lawn and a front desk that hadn't changed since the Carter administration. But to the people who'd grown up there, Harmontown was home. And to the federal authorities watching it from afar, it had become a dot of interest on a growing map of rural towns where the stories didn't match the reports. Viola was 79 years old, and she had stopped counting her aches a long time ago. Her bones complained in the morning, her knees slowed her steps, and her left eye had a stubborn twitch that came and went with stress. But her mind was sharp and always had been. Once, long ago, she'd been a school librarian in Memphis, the kind with rules and wisdom, the kind who could silence a whole room with one raised brow. Her late husband, Richard, had been a police officer for 38 years, retiring with honors before his heart gave out on their back porch one Sunday morning. They had raised a son together, a quiet, serious boy who asked hard questions even before he could tie his shoes. That boy had grown into a man named Evan Jennings, and now, 39 years old and dressed in the neutral colors of someone who wanted to be overlooked, he had brought her here. Officially, she was here because Evan didn't want her living alone anymore. She was widowed, retired, and, according to the cover story, in need of rest. But behind the smile she gave their landlord and the careful nods she exchanged with neighbors, Viola knew why she was really here. Her son worked for the Bureau, not as a desk analyst or a tech wizard tucked away in some federal basement, but undercover, embedded deep in towns like this one, where stories didn't make headlines and people got hurt in ways the system rarely acknowledged. She had come to be near him, yes, but also to help him, in the only way she knew how, by listening. The house they rented sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was modest, with fading shutters and a creaky porch, but it was clean and had light in the kitchen. Viola claimed the spare bedroom and turned it into a sitting room, filling it with books, a tea kettle, and a notebook that looked innocent but wouldn't be, not for long. Evan had installed a secure connection on her tablet, just in case she ever wanted to upload family photos, and had given her a crash course in staying invisible. But she didn't need lessons. She'd been a black woman in the South for almost 8 decades. She understood invisibility better than most. The first week passed slowly. Viola went to church on Sunday, smiled politely at the usher, who gave her the wrong bulletin, and sat in the second row from the back. On Monday, she visited the local library and signed up as a volunteer, saying she used to be in the field. The head librarian, a nervous woman named Deborah with a tendency to fidget with her glasses, welcomed her with a stack of old returns and an apologetic smile. The building was small, 3 rooms and a leaky roof, but it smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and Viola felt at home. She met neighbors by walking, not fast, but steady. A nod here, a kind word there. She noticed who kept their lawns tidy and who didn't, who left their porch lights on and who double-checked their locks. People in towns like this one always said the same thing. Nothing bad happens here. But people like Viola knew better. Trouble didn't need to shout. It whispered. On her 4th day, she overheard a conversation at the grocery store between 2 women standing near the canned goods. One of them was describing how her son had been stopped walking home from school again. No ticket, no explanation. Just told to empty his pockets and keep moving. He was lucky, the woman said, as if that settled the matter. The other nodded. That's just how it is these days. He should know better than to wear a hoodie. Viola didn't say anything. She just picked up her beans and walked away. At home, Evan was quiet, as always. They kept their discussions limited to food and laundry in front of windows. Only at night, when the curtains were drawn and the microwave light flickered just right, did they speak freely. He told her there had been 3 complaints filed in the last month, none formal, none followed through. Young black men stopped, questioned, released, all without incident, but all without cause. And one name kept surfacing again and again, Officer Charles P. Pierce. Viola made a mental note and wrote the name down later that evening in her notebook. Not Officer Pierce, just CPP with the margins, followed by a question mark. By the end of the first week, she'd started to hear more. At the library, a young boy named Tobias, no older than 10, told her in passing how his big brother got face-downed last month for walking too fast down Magnolia Street. He said it with the same tone other boys used to talk about basketball scores or cafeteria lunches, like it was normal, like it was just part of being who they were in a place like this. Viola listened. Then she made another note. Evan warned her to be cautious, to move slowly. The Bureau couldn't afford any leaks, but he also trusted her. He knew that his mother, with her quiet patience and long memory, could hear things he couldn't, could get people to talk without realizing they were doing it. She had a way of making space for truth, the kind of space people hadn't felt in a long time. Each morning she sat on her porch with her tea. Each afternoon she took her walk. Each evening she uploaded another brief file to Evan's encrypted drive, nothing dramatic, just details. Who said what, when, where, who was present, the texture of the air, the way people changed their voices when they mentioned the police. And slowly a pattern began to form. It wasn't just the stories themselves. It was how people reacted to them. Shrugs, nervous laughter, apologies for things they didn't do. Mothers telling their sons not to run, not to shout, not to wear the wrong colors, or keep their hands in their pockets too long. And always the same refrain. You don't want to be next on one of his videos. That was how she first learned about Officer Pierce's side job as a social media sensation. TikTok clips, short edited videos with heavy music and fast cuts. Harmontown Hero, they called him. He had thousands of followers, videos of him de-escalating arguments, catching shoplifters, giving lectures to young men in need of guidance, all framed just right, all polished and clean. But what wasn't in those videos was what Viola cared about most. The silences, the edits, the moments cut short. In one clip, a teenager was shown mouthing off and getting cuffed. But Tobias had told her the full story. That boy hadn't mouthed off at all. He'd asked why he was being stopped, then cried, then complied. Viola wrote it all down. She started attending community meetings, not speaking, just sitting in the back with her notebook, nodding at the right moments. She heard praise for the department, heard Officer Pierce's name again and again, heard people talk about him like he was the one thing keeping Harmontown safe from big city problems. But she had seen enough cities, enough problems, to know that danger didn't wear a sign. Sometimes it wore a smile and a badge. The notebook began to fill, and her instincts, those same instincts that once helped her calm rowdy students and read between the lines of a parent's worry, told her this wasn't just another town. This wasn't just another episode. This was something deeper. She didn't say it aloud, but she felt it in her bones. Something was wrong in Harmontown, and she was going to help prove it. When Sunday came again, she stood outside the church and watched Officer Pierce exit his cruiser, walking tall, nodding at old men, and shaking hands like a local politician. A few feet away, a young black boy tensed and looked at the ground as the officer passed. Viola didn't smile. She took a step back, and in the cool shade of the church's brick wall, she pulled out her notebook and wrote one more name, this time without a question mark. The weeks slipped past quietly, one almost indistinguishable from the next, and in that silence, Viola Jennings kept her ears open and her notes growing. Nothing ever announced itself with a bang in Harmontown. Not the weather, not the holidays, not the hurt. It all moved slow and polite, but she had learned long ago that evil didn't always scream, it often smiled. By now, Officer Charles P. Pierce was more than a local name. He had become a symbol, not just of the department, but of a certain kind of myth the town wanted to believe. Every Saturday morning at the Main Street Diner, someone would mention him. Every Sunday at church, someone would thank him by name during the prayer circle. But what Viola found most telling wasn't the praise. It was the silence that followed whenever someone tried to question it. She'd seen it clearly the previous week. A woman named Letitia, mother of 2 teenage sons, had spoken softly during a church gathering about how one of her boys had come home, shaking after a traffic stop. No charges, no citation. Just hands on the hood and a lecture about watching his tone. Letitia hadn't said it with anger, only quiet concern, but even that was enough to chill the room. Someone coughed. Someone changed the subject. The pastor thanked her, then asked the congregation to pray for unity. And Officer Pierce, seated near the front with his arms crossed and a practiced grin on his face, hadn't looked over once. Viola took it all in. She wasn't there to interrupt. She was there to remember. It was around this time that Evan brought her the first batch of video clips. She watched them late at night, with the lights low and her reading glasses perched at the edge of her nose. Not the polished TikToks everyone else saw. These were raw body cam files, recovered from public databases and subpoenaed records, then matched against the edited versions circulating online. The differences were stark. What the town saw was a clean cut. Officer Pierce stepping into a situation, asserting control, offering grace to a trembling young man who always seemed moments from doing something regrettable. But what the uncut footage showed was different. In one video, a boy was pulled from a vehicle without ever being told why he was stopped. He asked twice, then was told to stop resisting, though he hadn't moved. The TikTok version cut out the first 40 seconds. No dialogue, no questions, no confusion, just the aftermath. Pierce helping him to his feet, voice calm, jaw set, like a father figure keeping the world in line. Viola rewound that one 3 times, letting the sound soak in. The boy's voice, cracked and uncertain, wasn't angry. It was afraid. That detail never made it to the internet. She took notes, of course, cataloged each clip. Not just what was in them, but what was missing. Every cut was a choice, and every choice told a story about who held the power. People had always said video didn't lie. But Viola knew better. People lied through video all the time, by trimming, by rearranging, by layering on music and color and tone, until what had actually happened became something else entirely. A performance, a justification, a narrative so neat it couldn't be questioned without being called divisive. What struck her most, though, was the way people talked about him. At the library, a teacher mentioned how Officer Pierce gets through to those kids like nobody else. At the barber shop, someone said, "At least he's doing something," as if doing anything with a badge was proof enough of righteousness. But the teenagers? They didn't talk about him much. And when they did, it was quiet, careful. One of them, Marcus, 16, lanky and soft-voiced, had come in to use the computer. Viola had noticed the way he kept checking the windows, as if even indoors, he wasn't sure he was safe. He barely spoke. But when he logged off, he turned to her and said, almost in passing, "He got me last year, said I looked nervous, told me that was probable cause." Viola didn't press him. She just nodded, wrote his name later, followed by a note. Doesn't walk alone after dark anymore. That same night, Evan came home with a folder of screenshots, social media posts, public praise. But he also brought something else, an audio file, an interview conducted by a colleague with a local woman named Marlene. Her son had been stopped by Pierce 3 months ago and filmed without consent. The charges were vague and eventually dropped, but the clip was still online, racking up likes under the caption, "Another close call." In the interview, Marlene's voice shook, but not with fear, with rage she was trying to hold in. "He made my son into a villain," she said, and the whole town clapped. Viola sat with that one for a long time. What she and Evan began to understand was that this wasn't just a pattern of behavior. It was a system built around performance. Pierce wasn't just enforcing the law. He was scripting it, directing it, crafting an image of danger and control that served 2 purposes. It reinforced the myth of his bravery, and it made sure no one would ask what happened before the camera started rolling. The next week, Viola started gathering her own footage. She didn't use anything fancy. Just her tablet tucked neatly in her bag, the lens angled just enough to catch faces and voices. She didn't chase moments. She waited for them, and they came. Outside the library, she filmed Pierce speaking to a group of boys who had been sitting on a bench too long, apparently. No citation, no arrest, just a lecture. But his tone, it wasn't about guidance, it was about dominance. And when he walked away, one of the boys whispered, "He always got to make it a scene." At a town council meeting, Viola noted how Pierce gave a speech about maintaining order in uncertain times. People applauded. No one asked questions. She started marking the locations he appeared most frequently: school parking lots, low-income housing blocks, the convenience store on Jefferson Street, always where young black men might gather, always when the sun was low and the shadows long enough to look dramatic on camera. Evan began compiling the data: dates, times, distances between stops, matching Pierce's route history with local complaints. A map started to form, and it wasn't random. Then came the footage that made Viola's hands tremble. A 17-year-old identified only as D. Howard had been pulled over for walking home after dark. No weapon, no drugs, just a cracked phone in his hoodie pocket. The clip showed Pierce shouting commands, gun half raised. The boy didn't move. He just cried. That clip never made it online, but the body cam file did, and it sat in evidence for over 2 months before being accidentally deleted, at least until Evan recovered it from a separate archive. Viola watched the full video in silence, then stood and walked outside. The air smelled like jasmine and dust. She looked up at the stars, then back at her porch light. She didn't cry. She rarely did anymore. But something inside her settled into certainty. This wasn't a town problem. This was a reckoning. She went back inside and picked up her notebook, wrote the boy's name, the date, the street. Then in large, clean letters across the top of a fresh page, she wrote one sentence: "He is building an empire out of fear." And underneath that, in smaller print, "But it won't stand." The next morning, she went to the library early and asked Deborah for a list of local mothers who volunteered at the school. Deborah, ever polite, gave it with a smile. Viola made her calls one by one, invited them for tea. Some declined. 2 said yes. And so began her quiet campaign, not against a man, but against the lie he built. One story at a time. The wind had turned colder by the time Viola Jennings realized she was being watched. It wasn't anything overt, not the kind of scrutiny that made a woman flinch or glance over her shoulder. It was subtler than that: a pause too long from passing officers, a second glance at the grocery store, the sudden shift in tone when she entered a room and conversation faltered. And it all traced back to the morning she caught Officer Pierce noticing her tablet. It had been a quiet Tuesday, cloud-heavy and still. Viola had been walking near the corner of Jefferson and Main, just outside the small market where teenagers like to linger after school, when she saw it unfold. A group of boys, 3, maybe 4, had been laughing and sharing chips near the newspaper box when a black and white patrol car crept into view. Pierce stepped out alone, his hand resting on the top of the door, one foot angled like he'd rehearsed the stance. His tone was calm, practiced, the same one Viola had heard dozens of times in his videos. He asked questions. He leaned in. He gestured at their pockets. There was no shouting, no arrest, no actual confrontation. But there didn't need to be. The power imbalance was clear. The message: "I see you. I can stop you whenever I like." Viola stood across the street, partially hidden behind a telephone pole, the tablet cradled low in her arms. She recorded it all, barely moving. But then, just before the patrol car pulled away, Pierce looked up. Their eyes met for barely a second. He said nothing, but his expression shifted, not into anger, but recognition. Not of her name or her past, perhaps, but of something more dangerous. A woman watching him when she wasn't supposed to. The next day it happened. She was standing outside the library with her tote bag when the cruiser rolled up beside her. Pierce stepped out, smile fixed, voice clipped. He asked if she wouldn't mind answering a few questions. Just routine. She nodded, holding her bag tightly. He gestured toward the bench nearby and began asking about her purpose in town, where she lived, whether she had any family locally. His tone never rose, but every word was edged with something heavier than politeness. She answered calmly, kept her voice even, gave him nothing to twist. Then he asked what was in her bag. She told him books. He asked to see them. She hesitated. He stepped closer. For a moment, the sidewalk went quiet. No one interfered. Two men across the street looked over, then turned away. Viola, breathing slow, opened her tote. Inside were 3 borrowed novels, a bottle of water, and the tablet screen off, camera covered, file already uploaded the night before. Pierce peered in, then leaned back, hands on his hips. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a shrug. "All clear," he said, as if he'd done her a favor. Later that afternoon, a clip appeared on Pierce's secondary account. Not the main department-sanctioned page, but one of his personal side projects. The video was short, only 20 seconds. No sound, no context. Just a zoomed-in shot of Viola standing by the bench, holding her tote, while a text overlay read, "Sometimes it's not the loud ones you watch for. Trust your gut." The post went semi-viral. Not thousands, but enough. The comments rolled in coded language, sharp jokes, even open speculation about whether she was up to something. One user called her a decoy. Another said, "Old ladies can be dangerous too." Viola didn't flinch. She didn't call Evan. She didn't respond. She just watched. But Evan noticed. He came home late that night, his jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable. He asked if she was all right. She said she was. Then he asked if she wanted him to escalate the report. She shook her head. "It's not time," she said simply, because she knew Pierce had overreached, and now he was vulnerable. The next day, she attended a parents' meeting at the local elementary school. Not as a parent, of course, but as a volunteer library guest. She brought muffins. She smiled and listened. And she waited until one woman, a mother of a boy in the 6th grade, leaned in and whispered that she'd seen the video, that it didn't sit right. "I know who you are," the woman added, with a glance. Viola didn't confirm or deny. She simply reached into her notebook and slid the woman a small folded slip of paper. A name, a file number, a link. That afternoon, the woman sent an email. It arrived at a regional civil rights nonprofit less than 2 hours later, and the next morning, Evan received a call from a federal supervisor. The response was swift, efficient, and clear. They had enough. They needed only one more moment, a tipping point, and it came faster than expected. 3 days later, Pierce pulled over a high school student near the laundromat on the edge of town. The boy was 16, slight and nervous, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. The stop was textbook at first. Standard questions, firm tone. Then came the escalation. Pierce asked about the bag. The boy hesitated. Pierce raised his voice. A hand moved toward his belt. The boy dropped his knees to the sidewalk and started to cry. That would have been the end of it, except someone else was watching. His mother, Tiana Riggins, had arrived moments earlier. She worked nearby. She saw the stop from her car, grabbed her phone, and hit record. Within minutes, the footage was online. It wasn't edited, it wasn't stylized, it was raw. And in it, the whole world saw what Viola had been recording in pieces for months. Power flexed without cause, fear worn like a second skin, and a badge held higher than the truth. By that evening, the video had surpassed 600,000 views, and Pierce, for the first time, wasn't in control of the story. Tiana was no ordinary mother. She was a former producer from Atlanta, a woman who understood how media worked, how tone shaped perception, how to flood the narrative before it could be twisted. Her post was simple. "My son is not a suspect. He's a student walking home from school." The response was immediate. Local podcasts reached out, regional journalists called, civil rights groups amplified, and in nearly every thread, the same question began to surface. What about all the other videos? What about the other stops? What about the woman with the tote bag? And that was when the name Viola Jennings began to circulate. Some guessed she was a former judge. Others said she was an activist planted by outsiders, but none of them knew. Not really, and that was the point. She was no one, and she was everyone. At the police department, the shift was palpable. Officers stopped meeting her gaze. Conversations ended when she walked into a room. One morning, she found a screenshot from Pierce's video taped to the inside of the break room fridge. Someone had scribbled over it with a pen. "Not everything needs to be content." She didn't react. She simply tore it down and walked out. That same day, her tablet buzzed with a secured message. The file was simple. Subject 009, priority escalation, internal support authorized. She showed it to Evan. He didn't speak, just nodded once. That night, she sat alone at the kitchen table and opened her notebook. She read every entry, every date, every name, every silence. And then, in the bottom corner of the final page, she wrote, "Now we speak louder." Then she closed the cover, set it beside her cup of tea, and waited. The storm that had gathered over Harmontown didn't come with thunder or broken windows. It arrived as silence. That strange, weighty silence that settles after the first truth is spoken aloud, and no one dares to be the one who denies it. After the video of Tiana Riggins' son went viral, the temperature in town shifted. Not the weather, but the mood, the current under conversations. People didn't just nod politely anymore. They watched. They waited. They measured their words more carefully, and some stopped speaking altogether when certain names came up. And above all others, it was Charles P. Pierce who drew that quiet like a shadow wherever he went. Viola Jennings noticed it first in the grocery aisle. A mother she had spoken with 2 weeks earlier pretended not to see her. At the pharmacy, a young clerk who used to ring up her tea and smile now offered clipped politeness. Even at church, the pews around her were less full than usual. Not from fear of her, perhaps, but from the discomfort she now represented. Truth had a way of doing that, making the familiar suddenly feel like evidence. She didn't flinch. She had been called names before. She had been a woman in rooms where she wasn't wanted since before half of Harmontown was born. She could bear the distance. It wasn't silence that frightened her. It was apathy, and that was already beginning to crumble. At the police station, the tremors were no longer hidden. Pierce's posture had changed. His swagger was still there, but brittle, like someone walking on ground he wasn't sure would hold. He moved faster, spoke louder, smiled harder. But no one missed the tension in his jaw when he passed an open laptop. A few younger officers now spoke in lowered voices when he entered a room. Others avoided him entirely. One morning, he found a single sheet of paper slipped under his office door. It was a printed still from his own video Viola at the bench, toad in hand. Across it, written in thick black ink, were 5 words. "You're not the only camera." No signature, no threat. Just the truth. And Pierce knew. That night he made a call. It was short, curt, and direct. He dialed Officer Langston, one of the few he still trusted, though trust was a thin word these days, and told him to meet him at the old industrial park on the east side of town. The excuse was flimsy, just a vague report of loitering, but he didn't need Langston to believe it. He just needed someone there to say it happened. What he didn't know was that the call was being monitored. 2 days earlier, under a direct order from Evans' federal contact, Pierce's phone had been tapped. The Bureau wasn't improvising anymore. They were containing. And when that location was mentioned, 2 agents stationed just a few blocks away in an unmarked SUV exchanged a look, clicked on their mics, and started the engine. Viola had already known something was coming. She felt it in the way Evan moved around the kitchen that morning, slower, as if calculating the time between each sip of coffee. He hadn't said much, just kissed her forehead before leaving and told her, almost offhandedly, to stay in tonight. She nodded. No questions. By 8:42 p.m., the gravel lot behind the abandoned warehouse was nearly empty. A few rusted containers stood like forgotten tombstones, the air thick with the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Langston leaned against the hood of his cruiser, checking his watch, when Pierce pulled up. He didn't waste time. Clipboard in hand, he laid out his version of the story. That the man from the gas station, the one from the video weeks earlier, the one who'd kept his tone too calm and his record too clean, had been spotted near the industrial park more than once. No crime yet. But maybe he was planning something. Langston shifted uneasily. "We're not planting anything, right?" Pierce waved him off. "Of course not. We're just watching. If he runs, we follow. If he resists, we document." Langston didn't answer. Across the street, the SUV sat dark and quiet. Inside, 2 agents listened to every word. And 2 blocks over, Evans stood in the second-story window of an abandoned storefront, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the alley below. He wasn't wired tonight. He didn't need to be. The surveillance team had full visibility. They were already writing the final page of the report. At 9:07 p.m., Pierce positioned himself behind one of the containers, flashlight low, camera already rolling. He was waiting for Elijah. That was the name he thought he knew. But the man he had stopped weeks ago wasn't coming. There would be no walk-by, no false confrontation. Instead, a voice crackled on his radio. Unit 3 to Captain Pierce. Code 15. Immediate location check requested. Pierce froze. He pressed the mic. Say again? The voice repeated, but this time it was joined by another. Captain Pierce, this is Special Agent Robert Mencken with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please remain where you are. You are currently being monitored under an open federal inquiry. The flashlight in his hand wavered. Langston stepped back, hands lifted instinctively, unsure if he was part of the target or just a witness now. Across the street, the SUV's headlights blinked twice, and then the door opened. No guns drawn, no shouting, just calm, deliberate motion. The next morning, Harmontown woke to the kind of stillness that didn't come with peace, but with the knowledge that something had cracked wide open. There were no new posts from Officer Pierce, no fresh videos, no inspirational captions, just a shuttered account, a darkened cruiser, and whispers that rippled through the coffee shops and school parking lots. By 6 a.m., 3 unmarked vehicles had parked in front of the police department. Agents in plain suits entered without ceremony, bypassing the front desk entirely. At her kitchen table, Viola watched the sky change color. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. She simply waited. At 7:04 a.m., a knock came at Pierce's office door. Agent Mencken stepped inside, sealed folder in hand. Captain Pierce, he said with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard, we're serving a federal arrest warrant. The charges were read slowly. Obstruction of justice, falsification of public records, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Pierce didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't even speak. When the cuffs clicked into place, he glanced up at Mencken and asked only one question. You planned this? Mencken nodded once. You planned it for us. Outside, a few officers stood behind the blinds. Some looked away. Others didn't blink. One rookie, barely a year on the force, shifted uncomfortably. The ending hadn't gone how he expected. At the foot of the steps, a local reporter raised a mic. Captain Pierce, any comment? He said nothing, but behind him another figure stepped into view. Viola Jennings, no longer hidden, no longer watching. She stood beside Agent Mencken as Pierce was led away. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked on with the same quiet patience that had guided her from the first day in town. The reporter turned to her. Ma'am, are you willing to comment on what happened here? She didn't answer right away. Then gently she said, the truth speaks louder than edits. That was all, but it was enough. By noon, footage of the arrest had spread across major platforms, not the dramatized kind Pierce used to create, but raw and unfiltered. No music, no captions, just the sound of footsteps on concrete and the metallic click of accountability. The reaction was mixed at first. Some of Pierce's supporters cried political targeting. Others claimed it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too precise, the footage too thorough, the comparisons too stark. One by one, the masks fell. Old reports surfaced, names returned, faces reemerged. And across Harmontown, the silence Viola had come to know so well began to lift. 2 weeks later, she attended a community meeting at the town hall, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as someone who had helped shape the moment. Tiana Riggins sat in the front row. Langston, no longer on active duty, stood near the back, arms folded, watching quietly. And at the microphone, a teenager read a statement. His voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of being heard. I was one of the boys he stopped, he said. No ticket, no charge, just humiliation. I thought it was my fault. Then I saw her notebook, and I believed I wasn't alone. There was no applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, something sacred took root. A few days later, Evan packed up his things. No press conference, no ceremony, Just a clean apartment and a note on the door. Healing starts when truth is louder than fear. Viola didn't cry when he left. She didn't need to. His work had been done, and hers in many ways was just beginning. The library offered her a permanent volunteer role. The school asked her to help with civic education programs. Mothers stopped avoiding her. Teenagers nodded when they passed. Officers, new ones, vetted and trained under oversight, began introducing themselves first. And every evening, before she closed her front window, Viola opened her notebook, now filled to its final page, and reread one sentence she had written in steady hand the night the silence broke. They won't remember my name, but they'll remember that I didn't look away. Then she placed it on the shelf beside her husband's old badge, turned off the lamp, and let the night settle in peace. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to discover another powerful journey and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.